This is a little bit of a lighter topic. We talk a little bit about, I guess, hormone, because we speak a little bit about cortisol, which is a hormone that, has a lot to do with our mood. I think a lot of people have certain foods that put them in certain moods. And I think more specifically, certain foods that boost our moods, right? So there's like a whole, reputation, let's say, around ice cream, right? When we're like depressed or feeling upset about something, people take that tub out of ice cream, right? It's in all these movies and like it's on these TV shows. And I think that like kind of goes hand in hand. Ice cream, that's a mood booster because I think it's just comfort food. But there's more to food than just being a comfort food. There are actual chemical properties in foods that can enhance mood. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. An introduction to stress and the nervous system. So again, we're going to go a little bit into that science background, but it's not too much. It's very light. What is stress? So stress is the body's biological response to situations that seem uncomfortable or dangerous, whether or not they truly are. We all experience stress of some kind, right? A lot of people feel, when they're out of their comfort zone or they feel they're in danger, whether or not they really are, or something really is considered a objective stressful situation, people feel it. Stress really is subjective. No two people really have the same stressors or things of that sort, but we all experience stress of some kind. So there's two stress responses. There's acute stress and there's chronic stress. So acute stress is a short-lived survival response to life-threatening situations. And then chronic stress is a prolonged state of stress due to everyday life situations. An example of acute stress is if, God forbid, someone's not feeling well and they end up, needing to go to the hospital and, they're taken care of there. And then that, they feel better, they go home, fine. That was an acute. Chronic stress is something that's really long-term. So for example, someone's really, really unhappy in their job. And every day they wake up and they just feel so stressed about going to work and it just like takes over their mind. And it's something that's just a lot more chronic and it's just really a part of their day-to-day life. Getting into a car accident, having relationship problems, feeling unfulfilled at work. So getting into a car accident, that's an example of acute stress, right? It's something that's very stressful in the moment and it can be like stressful for a day or two and it's really like acute. It's pretty short term, relatively speaking. Having relationship problems, this is more chronic. And feeling unfulfilled at work, which is the example I just had given before, also an example of chronic stress. So we have the autonomic nervous system. So there's sympathetic and parasympathetic. So sympathetic is activated by both acute and chronic stress. And the parasympathetic nervous system is activated when in a steady state of calm or relaxation. We want that response. Okay, so now we're going to get to hormones. What are hormones? So hormones are chemical messengers that influence functions of the body like growth, development, and metabolism. So the adrenal glands sit on top of our kidneys as shown on the left. So look at that picture. That's where the adrenal glands are. The adrenal glands release two stress hormones. So there's epinephrine, which is like adrenaline, and cortisol. So when people say the adrenaline is kicking in, that's what they're referring to. It's that epinephrine, and then cortisol as well is another one. So epinephrine or that adrenaline is associated with acute stress, right? Sometimes when people have that like acute stress, their adrenaline's really kicking in and it kind of like takes over. And cortisol is associated more with a chronic stress. Elevated cortisol. So we really want to prevent our cortisol levels from being too high and too elevated. Because when we do, it disrupts digestion. So digestion occurs in the parasympathetic state. So when we're kind of calm and a little bit more relaxed, that's when digestion actually occurs and it occurs properly. When there's elevated cortisol levels, we tend to have like some GI distress sometimes. We feel like reflux or heartburn. And a lot of that time it's because it really does disrupt digestion. And, sometimes people say like, oh, I have like diarrhea or I have a stomach ache. We say like, oh, it's mental, but really it can be because of these elevated cortisol levels when we're feeling stressed. Sleeping problems when we have elevated cortisol, right? We have insomnia. It doesn't allow us to fall asleep as easily or stay asleep. Restlessness and chronic fatigue. We're just feeling tired. It also weakens our immunity. We're more susceptible to colds and other illnesses as well. It also causes appetite changes, right? So ghrelin, which is a hormone that increases our hunger, so that increases, and leptin, which is the fullness one that tells our body, okay, we're full, stop eating. that decreases. So we end up eating more, which then can, cause more weight gain because it's associated with sugar cravings and increased fat storage and just like more processed food cravings and things like that. And then that can ultimately be a recipe for, chronic diseases that's associated with obesity, heart disease, diabetes, and things of that sort. So really, especially when we do have these chronic stresses and we have these elevated cortisol levels for long periods of time, it really can ultimately cause, these appetite changes, which, then bring us to weight gain, which then bring us to chronic diseases. So it really, really does have more of an effect than we think. So elevated cortisol, so mental health contributes to headaches, irritability, anxiety, depression, and brain fog, right? Those are all of the effects that elevated cortisol can have on our mental health. So really like not such fun things. When people feel stressed or depressed or like, a ton of anxiety that kind of takes over, it can contribute to headaches. A lot of times like doctors will say, oh, I think it's all mental, it's all mental, but it might be, but we're still experiencing these headaches. We're still experiencing these symptoms. So yes, maybe it makes you feel better because it's not actually due to anything really underlying other than stress. It's still something that we want to get under control. So helpful hormones. So serotonin is the happiness hormone and it's released through diet and exercise, right? When we're eating properly, when we're exercising, when we're engaging in physical activity, that's when serotonin is released. And then we have oxytocin. So oxytocin is, they call it the love hormone, and it's released through social interaction, through physical interaction. Oxytocin is something that's, for example, when a mother holds their newborn or their baby, or, if they nurse their babies, oxytocin is released. So it causes this happiness or this relaxation in both the baby and the mother, because it's released in both parties. But oxytocin is one of those hormones that they call it the love hormone that kind of goes through the life cycle, right? As we get older, we still crave social interaction. It's still really important for us. People who feel isolated have these low oxytocin levels, sometimes just creates this train effect of not allowing people to be happy and continued isolation and things of that sort. So it's definitely a really, really important thing for us to continue to be social, be physical, in a good way, obviously not in a violent way, but to allow this release of this love oxytocin hormone. So now we're going to get to the nutrition part, which is obviously my favorite part. So we want to combat stress with foods to boost mood and mindful eating. Mood boosting macronutrients. When we talk about the macronutrients, we speak about fats, carbohydrates, and protein. So when we talk about fats, we want healthy fats, right? So we want things like salmon or other fatty fish, olive oil, walnuts. These are all said to lower cortisol levels. And that is ultimately the goal. When we have any sort of chronic stress, we want to lower these cortisol levels, and healthy fats can be very, very helpful in doing so. Also, whole grains increase serotonin and promote feelings of calmness. So as we mentioned, serotonin is one of those helpful hormones. So we want those to increase. And then lean proteins, stress increases the need for protein to lower blood sugar. When we are under stress, specifically acute stress, and you see this a lot in the hospitals. When I was working in an inpatient clinical setting, they would always do blood labs. When people's bodies were under this acute stress, like of being sick, you would see a major rise in blood sugar, even in patients who did not have diabetes. But even more so in patients who did have diabetes, you really saw an increase in blood sugar. And blood sugar would, that acute stress and really long-term chronic stress also can raise blood sugars. So it's really important that we make sure we're eating foods that help kind of bring down these blood sugars. And it's fine if it's very short term that these blood sugars are raised. It's nothing really of concern, but it's just an important thing to note, an important thing to understand, that we do want to make sure that we are eating foods that will prevent our blood sugars from staying elevated too long. So mood boosting micronutrients. So we have magnesium. So when people say, oh, dark chocolate, it's good for your mood. So I'm not saying dark chocolate that's like Hershey's dark chocolate. I'm saying real dark chocolate with real, cocoa or cacao or anything of that sort. Nuts are also, a really good source of magnesium. And these activate calm receptors in the brain. So it causes us to be calm. So when people say, oh, chocolate, it makes you feel better. So there really is something to be said about that. Obviously, we're speaking of, real dark chocolate, but it does activate these calm receptors in the brain, and it causes us to just ultimately be more calm overall. Vitamin C, so things like citrus fruit, bell peppers, tomatoes, these all are great sources of vitamin C. And these lower cortisol levels, which again are those hurtful hormones, and we want that to be lower. And then potassium, things like avocado, bananas, leafy greens, these also reduce blood pressure. So when we are in a state of acute stress or long-term chronic stress, we'll notice our blood pressure is higher as well. And we want to ultimately lower that. So, just make sure we're eating foods, that can help reduce that. And potassium is definitely one of those foods. So gut health and stress. So studies show a strong connection between poor gut health and chronic stress. I went to a lecture about a month and a half ago, and a doctor she's a gastroenterologist. She very, very much focuses on gut health. She said that cortisol, like 85% of cortisol is in our gut. The rest of the percentage of that, the rest of the 15% is in our brain, but really most of it's in our gut. So when we have a healthy gut, that's what's really important. That's what will lower the cortisol levels. When we're eating unhealthy foods and we're not taking care of our gut properly, that can actually increase cortisol levels. So probiotics. So there are supplements that you can take for probiotics, but there really are good sources of foods that are probiotics as well. So yogurt, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, like any sort of like pickled vegetables. These are all really, really good sources of probiotics. And what probiotics is they are these healthy bacteria that live in our gut and keep our microflora or the bacteria in our gut healthy. So they're very, very important. So again, you can get them through supplements, but there are a ton of food sources that are really, really great that can help keep our gut healthy as well. And then what prebiotics are the food that the probiotics feed off of, right? So we want to make sure that we're getting good sources of prebiotics so that the probiotics can eat, because bacteria, they're living microorganisms, right? And we want to make sure that they're able to live and flourish in our gut. So they need these prebiotic foods to live. Good sources are like soluble fiber. So like oats, peas, beans, green bananas. As soon as they ripen and become yellow, they're helpful to, if somebody has, diarrhea or has like GI distress, they can be helpful for that. But actually when they're green before they're ripe, they may not taste as good, but they're a very good source of prebiotics. There also are supplements for prebiotics as well. Not as easy to find as probiotics. You can definitely find them. So these are two very, very important things for our gut to keep them healthy, to, hopefully decrease our stress or these cortisol levels. So caffeine and stress. So elevated cortisol levels can lead to sleep disturbances and chronic fatigue. And to combat this, many people turn to caffeine, right? They'll be like, oh, I'm not sleeping so well. I need like 3 cups of coffee, 4 cups of coffee, or energy drinks or soda. But caffeine also increases cortisol levels and stress. So we have to realize that we're kind of putting a Band-Aid over one thing. It's like kind of like whack-a-mole. It's like, we're not going to be tired, but then, hey, here's cortisol level, it's coming up. So we have to realize that we're actually doing more harm when we're just covering up our fatigue with drinking like these energy drinks and caffeine. And I'm not saying we can't have a cup or 2 of coffee a day. That is totally fine. But people are drinking coffee, and then they're having Red Bull, and then they're having soda, and they're just having all of this caffeine to kind of mask this like, okay, I'm not sleeping well, so I'm just going to cover that up with caffeine. And ultimately, it's going to raise these cortisol levels and will cause more issues down the road. So try not to drink caffeine on an empty stomach, right? We do want to have some food in our stomach. I know a lot of people, the first thing they do when they wake up is they want a cup of coffee, but we really should have some food in our stomach. Drink coffee in moderation, no more than 4 cups daily. I think 4 cups is still considered to be a lot. I would say 2 or 3, but there are some people that really do need those 4 cups. So 4 cups is okay if you need it, but I would try to cut back to 2 or 3. Try to eliminate processed and or sugary drinks to the best of your ability. I know sometimes we just kind of need something with a little bit of sugar, a little bit of taste, but more often than not, our beverages of choice should be water, seltzer, unsweetened iced teas, things like that. Try swapping caffeinated beverage for a calming alternative. So here are some calming alternatives. So herbs and teas, right? So a green tea, it contains this L-theanine, which has been shown to reduce stress. Lavender tea reduces inflammation associated with lower anxiety. And chamomile promotes relaxation and eases digestive issues, which can also come from these increased cortisol levels. So these are really great alternatives, especially, a lot of people before bed, they find they like to have these herbal teas. They find it relaxes them. It kind of helps them go to sleep a little bit easier, stay asleep. Everyone has to some degree stress. There's a lot of financial stressors out there, and there's a lot of social stressors out there, and that's normal. Everybody has stress to some degree, but what our job is to try to decrease it as much as possible. And that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not telling everybody shouldn't feel any stress at all, because that's not normal. But what are some things that we can do? And these herbal teas are really, really helpful to some people. So if it's something that you're willing to try, I definitely recommend that. Mindful eating. The first thing we want to do is eat intuitively. So practice making healthy decisions around meal times without restriction. Be present. We want to put screens away, right? We don't want to be sitting in front of the TV or our phones. Snacks, I'm going to say, if you're sitting at a desk and you're doing work and you're going to have a snack, that's fine. But if you're home and you're able to put those screens away, then I think that's a really, really great practice to do. It really allows you to both enjoy the food that you're eating as well as the company, right? And the company is going to be very, very important for those social interactions to make sure that oxytocin or that love hormone is released. Chew slowly. Chewing initiates the digestion and absorption process, so that can help also to make sure that we're digesting properly and we're not going to have any of these digestion problems. And take deep breaths between bites to improve digestion and to tune into hunger and fullness cues. These are all very, very important parts of what we call mindful eating. And I know it's easier said than done, but there are times that I find myself shoving down my mouth. And, sometimes that has to be because you're in a rush, but you also want to make sure you're eating. But when we can, especially dinner time, or, when you have a meal or a snack that's at a more quiet time, you should definitely try to practice mindful eating, because it's very, very helpful. And I think with all the stresses that we kind of have in our lives, it can definitely be helpful in just feeling more calm. So smart snacking. So sometimes we want to eat when we're not hungry, and that's okay. That's totally okay. We don't only need to eat when we're hungry. Sometimes we want to eat to prevent those hunger pains or anything like that. So opt for raw vegetables like carrots, peppers, cucumbers. This can release draw attention and satisfy a desire to crunch, and it provides nutrients without contributing to weight gain. Obviously, when we're hungry, you should have a snack. But sometimes we're just sitting by the desk and we're feeling bored and we're just all right, let's get a bag of chips. Those situations when we're not hungry, we should probably opt for something that's really not going to contribute at all to any sort of weight gain or any, increased hormone level or anything of that sort. So vegetables are definitely the way to go. Healthy and affordable meals to reduce stress. So chocolate pudding. So this healthy alternative makes for an indulgent snack packed with mood boosting ingredients. So we're actually using really interesting ingredients here. So there's the banana, avocado, some dark chocolate. You can use cocoa powder too, a dark chocolate cocoa powder, Greek yogurt, and some honey. And you can use maple syrup instead of that as well. You're going to put all of this into a large bowl, add all your ingredients. Essentially, you're going to mash it. If you're not using the powder and you're using a chocolate bar, then you want to obviously melt that, add it all together, put as much honey or maple syrup to, the desired sweetness. But when you are using a banana, a ripe banana, which obviously is not going to be a prebiotic at that point, but that's okay, then it should add for its sweetness. And you don't even need a blender. I know when I did this, I did use a blender. You don't need one. But if you do want to make it a little bit smoother and creamier, then I do recommend a blender. So more than just food. So we spoke about the nutrition. So sleep. So restful sleep lowers cortisol levels and fights fatigue. So instead of masking that with that caffeine, let's try to just make our sleep better. And trust me, I understand just not being able to get good sleep, but there are definitely things that we can do to boost us getting better sleep. And even if that's going to be taking some melatonin, or that's going to be drinking tea before bed, or just doing some meditation before bed or something like that, to just kind of allow our minds to rest a little bit, that can be very, very helpful in helping us get just a more restful sleep. Physical activity relieves tension and deepens breathing and just allows for more calmness as well. People also really like to use exercise as just a way to get like frustrations out and to just kind of clear our minds. And it's something that before I started really exercising regularly and, really regularly engage in physical activity, which, I do now, I didn't really understand, but I really do find that even when I'm really stressed or something's kind of taking over, I really am able to just kind of get rid of all of that when I'm engaging in physical activity. Okay, so that's exercise. So that really, really does help, just allowing us to kind of breathe a little bit better and hopefully get rid of some of that stress. Even if it's short term, it really can be very helpful with that. And then mindfulness. So promotes mental clarity and decreases blood pressure. Mindfulness doesn't need to look like this picture, right? We don't need to sit on the floor with our legs crossed and putting our hands like that and, our eyes closed. It definitely helps with focusing, but for some people, it doesn't do it. So there are apps that are free that we can use for meditation. It's like 10 minutes a day. And you don't have to sit like that. Like I said, you can sit on a chair and just focus on your breathing, focus on one specific object, right, in your room. Let's say there's a chair or there's a plant, and just focusing on that. And that kind of just also allows you to really become mindful. Yeah. Even if you don't use an app and you just take like 5 minutes a day to just focus on your breath work, I really, really believe that it's so helpful and can really just help calm us. And again, these are all like short-term things that we can do. But in that short term, we can lower our cortisol levels. We can increase those helpful hormones. And just having that even for a short period of time can be very, very helpful and healthy for us as well. These are very, very important practices to try to work on. Mental health, develop effective and healthier coping mechanisms, even if that includes going for therapy, right? I think therapy was such a taboo subject years and years ago. And nowadays, so many people go for therapy because it's really a great coping mechanism. And even if it's not going to, a mental health professional, finding one person that you can really talk to and feel like you can express everything to and kind of just open up to, that can be very, very helpful. And that kind of goes with social interaction as well. So being with friends and families and pets, this releases that love hormone, that oxytocin hormone. So just being social can be very, very helpful too. And self-care, make time for things that bring you joy and release serotonin. So much of our life is running around and busy and taking care of things. And, sometimes it's just really important to, practice self-care. So if that's sitting and reading a book or even sitting and watching TV or just going to get a foot massage or going bike riding or for a walk, whatever it is, whatever brings you joy, we really want to make time for that. And, so many people of us have just like busy lives and so much going on. And just, it's really important that we make time for that.
The art kit. So that gives you something that you can do and focus on. Definitely like stress relieving and helps with mental health.
It's actually interesting that you say art kit. My mom found this app on her phone that was like painting by number. And it was just so good for her. And it was still on her phone. So she was using an electronic, but it was such a good distraction for her. And she made all these things. She was so proud of the pictures and she printed them out. And one of them she hung up in her kitchen. It really just totally relieved so much stress. And I always tell people, I'm like, sometimes everyone's always thinking put the phones away, put the screens away, put everything away, which I agree with if that's what works. But for some people, they can find things. It's something you do want to do on your phone. There are things that you can do, if you just don't want the text messages and the emails coming in, put your phone on airplane mode, get off the Wi-Fi and just find an app that works for you, a word game or, an art app or something like that. That can be really, really helpful in relieving stress as well.
I think any of those things too that have, especially art, but any of those things too that if you feel really kind of out of control or something, it's that's a real tangible thing that you can do in that moment. And you can have a finished product eventually that's oh, look, I did this,
Something to be proud of.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think is great.
Good book. It just totally takes you into a different world. Sometimes it's just about getting out of your house too, right? Sometimes it's a good cry. Sometimes we just need a good cry. And that is totally fair. Crying and letting out of our emotions, so, so important. So we should never bottle things up. We should never just let things sit. Sometimes you just need a good cry and you can find that person to talk to or just on your own in your bedroom. And that's totally fine.